Once upon a time, in a land covered with snow-capped mountains and lush green valleys, there lived a princess named Snow White. She was as kind-hearted as she was beautiful, with skin as fair as the snow, lips as red as a rose, and hair as black as ebony. She lived in a grand castle with her father, the king, and her stepmother, the queen. The queen was a powerful sorceress, envious of Snow White's beauty. Every day, the queen would ask her enchanted mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For years, the mirror always replied, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." But one day, the mirror said, "Snow White is the fairest of them all." Consumed by jealousy, the queen devised a plan to get rid of Snow White. She ordered a huntsman to take Snow White deep into the forest and kill her. But the huntsman, moved by Snow White's innocence and kindness, couldn't bring himself to harm her. Instead, he told her to flee and never return to the castle. Snow White wandered through the forest, scared and alone. As night fell, she stumbled upon a cozy cottage. Curious, she entered and found that everything inside was small tiny chairs, tiny beds, and tiny dishes. Exhausted, Snow White lay down on one of the beds and fell into a deep sleep. The cottage belonged to 7 magical creatures who were the guardians of the forest. There was Fluffy the fox, Breezy the bird, Squeaky the squirrel, Blinky the owl, Rusty the rabbit, Twitch the chipmunk, and Whiskers the cat. When they returned home and found Snow White asleep, they were surprised, but not alarmed. The creatures sensed her kind spirit and decided to let her stay. When Snow White awoke, she was frightened at first, but the creatures quickly calmed her down. They listened as she told them her story, and they offered her refuge in their cottage. In return, Snow White helped around the house, cleaning and cooking for her new friends. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the queen discovered that Snow White was still alive. Enraged, she used her dark magic to disguise herself as an old peddler woman and set out to find Snow White. When she arrived at the cottage, she tricked Snow White into eating a poisoned apple. The moment Snow White took a bite, she fell into a deep, magical sleep. The 7 creatures were heartbroken when they found Snow White lying lifeless on the floor. They placed her in a glass coffin and kept watch over her, hoping that one day she would wake up. As time passed, news of the beautiful sleeping princess spread across the land. One day, a prince from a neighboring kingdom heard the story and came to see Snow White. When he saw her, he was so moved by her beauty and grace that he leaned down and kissed her gently. The moment his lips touched hers, the spell was broken. Snow White's eyes fluttered open, and she saw the prince smiling down at her. The 7 creatures cheered with joy. The prince and Snow White returned to the castle, where the wicked queen, upon seeing Snow White alive, was so shocked that she lost her power and vanished forever. Snow White and the prince were married in a grand ceremony, and the 7 creatures were honored guests at the wedding. From then on, Snow White and the prince ruled the kingdom with kindness and wisdom. They often visited the 7 creatures in the forest, and their friendship lasted for all time. And so, Snow White lived happily ever after, surrounded by love, laughter, and her magical friends.